Hey, I'm Jaxon, and this is my story. So in 2005, 3 years after I was born, my parents went to the doctor and I was diagnosed with chronic anxiety. And anxiety has been a part of my story for ever since I remember. I remember being a kid, and in our neighborhood, I would want to go play with our friends, but I would stay inside because I saw one dark cloud in the sky and I thought that a tornado was going to hit our house. I remember one night when tornado sirens were going off, I was petrified and I wouldn't leave my bed when my parents knew that the best situation was to go into the downstairs bathroom. This anxiety has taken over my life ever since I remember. In 2010, my parents felt the call to move to the mission field. What they didn't know is that it would take a 10-year period to do that and follow that calling. My dad was a videographer for the church, and my mom worked in the children's ministry making plans and doing worship with them. My dad did freelance work for another church, and it's through that church that my dad learned about mission trips and went on mission trips. His first one was to India, and my parents both thought maybe this is the place that we're supposed to move to. And my dad went there and spent 2 weeks there doing mission work and taking videos. And he came back with gifts for me because I'm their only child, so I get spoiled with all of the things. And my parents talked and they realized, no, this isn't where God is calling us. My dad went to Puerto Rico, and in that time period, my mom was like, okay, Spanish, we'll be able to learn that a little easier and it'll be closer to home. He came back with gifts for me again, but that wasn't it. God wasn't calling them there. And in 2015, my dad officially went to Kenya. That was his third mission trip with his freelance work. But a couple weeks before that, he had a dream about a wide open savanna and a couple trees and the African animals walking across it. And he heard God say, "This is the land I've set before you." And he woke up and, okay, this is weird. Whatever it is, God, you'll work it out. And so he went to Kenya, and on one of their excursions, they were able to go on a safari. And like the videographer he is, he brought his camera. And he was taking pictures and video out of the side, and he looked across the side of the safari car, and there it was, that same image. And God said, this is the land I've set before you. And from that moment, my dad knew that this is the place that we're going to go. Middle school Jackson in 2015, when Dad came home and said, hey, we're going to move across the world, he didn't really like that. I had a panic attack, and I remember going onto the couch in our living room and plugging my ears and screaming because I didn't want to do that. What were we going to do with Lucy, our dog? What was I going to do with all of my friends that I had, the school that I was going to? All of these things were so many changes that I was having to deal with. What we didn't know is that it would take another 5 years after that point to officially move to Kenya. And in that period, I was working in the children's ministry at our church at the time, and my youth pastor came up to me and said, Jaxon, you're doing really good with this. Have you ever thought about maybe God calling you to church ministry? And I looked at him in the face and said, no, not really. At that point, I thought church people were weird, and now I'm one of those, and so I guess I'm weird. But in that time, I didn't think that God would be calling me to the church. And I did the amazing, good Christian thing to do, and I ran from that calling. I ran from it so far that I now look back and regret the decisions that I made. I made choices that I am not proud of and hung out with people that I probably shouldn't have. But God always works things for His glory, and I was able to eventually see those friendships grow in Him. I helped those people come to Christ and was able to work with them to follow God. In May of 2019, my parents came back from downtown Atlanta, where our sending agency is based off of, and they said, hey, by the way, we're fully funded. And in 2 weeks, we packed all of our things and moved halfway across the world to Kenya. A lot of the times, missionaries can be seen as these head over heels, in love with God people who desire to go to the mission field and do all of the work for Him. That wasn't me. We moved to a town that had 30,000 people, and my parents and I were 3 of 7 white people. So if you do the math, that's a lot less white people than Africans. And I had days where culture shock ruined me. I remember going to a soccer game that my friends took me to, and they said, "Oh yeah, come with us. We're just gonna, play some soccer." What I didn't realize is that it was a county-wide soccer tournament. So there was probably over 300 people there. And if you do the math a little more, I was one of 300. I remember going home that night and crying and just asking God, what the heck have you done? In 2021, I moved back here to start college. And that Jaxon is a much, much different Jaxon than 2019 Jaxon. I now look back at Kenya and realize all of the good that he did. God truly moved in my life to help me no longer run away from my calling, but press on and move straight towards him. There's a book that I read while in Kenya. It's called The Shack, and it's based off of this story that a man who's far away from God meets God in a shack, and his life completely changes after that experience. And I tell people that in my story, Kenya is my shack. I was living a life that I do not agree with and am not proud of. And I met God in a country that I never thought that I would be living in a place that I told God wasn't where I was supposed to be. But God met me where I was and brought me back to him. And I can now look at that and say, yeah, God was there with me in the moments when I was on my floor crying, asking God, where are you? He was sitting there with me. And there's no place that I would have rather spent 3 years of my life. People have asked me, now that I'm off the field, well, would you have still gone if you could make that decision? And I say, absolutely. God sometimes doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And that's what I live my life by. I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be. But I know that everything that God calls me to, he's going to equip me for, even if I don't feel equipped for it.